Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Healthtech Podcast. This is a first look, and this is a first look at OpenAI's new preprint with Penda Health, saying that diagnostic errors, and I'm reading this, have been cut by 16% across nearly 40,000 patient visits in Kenya, which obviously sounds huge and amazing and wonderful. And to discuss this, based on a very impressive and very in-depth and great, frankly, LinkedIn article, I've got Dr. Paul Wicks here, neuropsychologist, journal editor, long-time sleuth of digital health, I will say, protecting us from all things research and evidence. And he's published this article, Extraordinary Claims, Weak Foundations is essentially the vibe. That's a bit of a teaser, but Paul, welcome to the Healthtech Podcast. How you doing, mate?
Thank you. I'm really good. It's great to be here and glad to be talking about this fascinating preprint.
Yeah, so OpenAI, a big beast, lots of money, doing lots of things, arguably the most important or relevant or something company at the moment, redefining the world that we live in. They have a huge amount of power and they've published something, and so everyone's going to stand up and listen, everyone's going to sit and watch or read or take heed. And so a classic Spider-Man, great power, great responsibility, etc. Why is this important and why did you jump on it?
So I think this is important for the reason you say. There's the scale here of these large tech companies, these large AI companies. The most good one can do as a doctor in a lifetime, there's estimates that, you might save half a dozen lives or something with the decisions you make. The most harm you could do, and not to be, glib, but things like cases like Harold Shipman, cases like Lucy Letby, terrible, but sort of show you the sort of maximal damage that sort of one bad actor in a system can have. However, the scale then cuts both ways when we come to health applications. Imagine the harm of an algorithm that we invisibly trust. Imagine the harm of an algorithm where, as a result of its being ubiquitous in health deployments around the world, maybe we take big decisions. Maybe we stop training so many doctors. Maybe we start de-skilling other healthcare professionals on the basis that the algorithm's got it under control. We're at a really important time. And if we think of our sort of, future colleagues 20 years from now, some of the foundational decisions we make, some of the foundational processes we build to safeguard that system are going to be the bedrock of whether or not their patients are safe, if their patients are well cared for.
So what have OpenAI said that they are capable of?
Yeah, so I want to sort of cite this in a context of something that had just happened 2 weeks earlier as well. So as you know, there's a relationship between Microsoft and OpenAI, and Microsoft has made a large investment into OpenAI. And just 2 weeks previously, Microsoft had put out blog posts, headlines, and many of their senior staff on LinkedIn were making specific claims that their technology, as a result of running through some vignette cases from the New England Journal of Medicine, were able to make some really difficult diagnoses. And some of the headline figures there was that, boiled down, their technology was 80% accurate compared to some human doctors who are only 20% accurate. And in that case, what we saw was a preprint. But the way preprints are meant to be used, that they're meant to be used by scientists to get out something that is so super exciting that you can't keep it to yourself, and you want to share it with the community, you want to show your methods, and you want to get feedback from the community. They are a way of spreading your methods. They were extremely useful in COVID when we didn't have time to wait for, say, long peer review cycles from typical journals. But there is really only one rule, and the rule is don't broadcast it in the media when it's a preprint.
Interesting.
And Microsoft did that, and they went and gave interviews. There was press about it. And so I first came to the Microsoft paper from the perspective of an associate journal editor, thinking, oh gosh, this huge corporation has just violated this principle of preprints. If I got this across my desk, could I even send it out for peer review? And I started with that angle. And then actually, as I started reading it, I started pulling that apart. So I first started with this LinkedIn article about Microsoft AI. And then just 2 weeks later, OpenAI did the exact same thing. And I'm not
Mhm.
suggesting that, Microsoft and OpenAI need to sit awake all night wondering what I'm thinking about in the middle of rural Staffordshire. But like, it's starting to feel like a pattern, right? Where you put out a preprint, which is not meant to be press release and not meant to be marketed, and these two companies, which altogether make up, a significant chunk of the stock market and US AI power, have both done the same thing in the same area, which is medicine. Now, the OpenAI paper is from a different part of so the New England Journal of Medicine paper is entirely theoretical, right? They've got theoretical vignettes, no patients touched by the system. The OpenAI system's deployed down in Kenya, down in Nairobi, with a private social enterprise health system, and it's been live. It's been deployed on, like you said earlier, tens of thousands of individuals. But again, the pattern goes along the lines of, well, we've seen this big press push, but then when you start reading into the details, a whole bunch of questions emerge that sort of look like maybe this preprint is not quite as fully baked as we might expect. And in both cases, both studies were missing some really fundamental underpinnings that make research good, that make it replicable, that make it safe, that make it reliable, and
Mhm.
allow us to trust, right? That allow us to trust different organizations and trust each other as researchers. So where this all comes from is, we as researchers or clinicians or whatever we are, we always default, I think, to giving each other the benefit of the doubt.
Yes.
Dr. X has made this referral. I'm sure they're trying their best. Right, that comes in. Or over these people who published their methods, they said they had some missing data, but they're accounting for it. I'm sure they're trying their best. That benefit of the doubt is not an automatic right. And I think when you come from a background of academia or hospital research or what have you, some of that kind of comes along with the territory. And
Mm.
what this made me question was when you have a big tech company that is worth hundreds of billions of dollars, that is moving whole economies around, that is building data centers, that is part of foreign AI policy,
Mm.
do they get that same benefit of the doubt or not? And are they
Mm.
taking actions now that earn that benefit of the doubt so that as they build up to this mass scale, we understand the process, we understand what's gone into it?
Mm. Because there has to be an appreciation of intent, right? Because that benefit of the doubt is closely related to trust and intent. And I think when you've got, I mean, it's a company is faceless, nameless, and of course, obviously, we know who Sam Altman is, but an entity like that, you can't you can't really appreciate intent as much. It's far more difficult to grasp, I guess. And so before we move on to like what they've actually done here, when you mention preprints, and I think this is a really, really, really good learning point for people that are in health tech, digital health, or even students of health tech and digital health, perhaps clinicians even. Whose rule is that you don't put preprints in media? Because this is a really interesting section of this for me and where we sit in the ecosystem at the border of health tech and media. Is it, you mentioned rule, you mentioned the word principle as well. And I'm wondering whose responsibility is it? Is it the responsibility of the people that have done the thing to not put it into media, or is it responsibility of media and a journalist in the source, the search for truth, to not publish the preprint, or is it both?
That's a really great question. So some of my context for this comes from when I sat on the board of the BMJ that was
Yeah.
involved in setting up something called medRxiv. So preprints have been around for a long time in biology, in computer science, in physics, and they
Right.
go on the basis that if you've done something interesting in the Large Hadron Collider that is going to change the field, you should tell everybody now, right? But
Yeah.
academic peer-reviewed journals take at best 6 months from when you submit
Yeah.
to getting accepted. They desk reject a lot of stuff. The more famous the journal, the more stuff they reject. So the BMJ rejects about 97% of what was sent to it. So if
Wow.
you have a great medical breakthrough and you send it to the Lancet, the BMJ, Nature, etc., and every one of them is taking a few months to reject you, you can talk about it a 2 year gap in some cases. So
Wow.
when there's a clinical decision to be made, an example during COVID would be if hydroxychloroquine doesn't work, and we have a good evidence base from recovery to do that. It's more useful in a preprint. We can take this immediately out to the wards. Maybe an unusual situation. We know it really takes 17 years for most science to get from bench to bedside, but this was an unusual case. So at the BMJ, Harlan Krumholtz from Yale, who was the architect of medRxiv, was making the case that it's important that we move with speed, but that these preprints will eventually be peer reviewed. And the benefit of putting them in a good archive is they get something called a digital object identifier, and that allows you to track the version number all the way through.
Yeah.
So actually, so there's a big theme here of basically like, say what you're going to do it, run the analysis, and then let other people look at it. And so the point of getting a preprint out is you could get early comments on it, and if you've done something really bad, like plagiarized a figure, or done something dangerous or what have you, that could be detected even before it went into peer review.
Yeah.
Or the community that does peer reviews in their spare time might add something useful, and maybe you update it to a version 2 or a version 3 before you submit it to the journal. So, but the big issue that people were concerned about was that people could, or academic researchers or clinical researchers, could put something dangerous into a preprint, something false. Hydroxychloroquine cures COVID. Off you go. And so there were lots of disclaimers made. One of them was like big disclaimer saying, do not use this for clinical decision making. But another one was, don't press release stuff. And so, the journals themselves at first were hesitant about these because it potentially disrupts their entire business model. And so these are the groups that have said guidelines. So COPE, as the overall global body about publishing ethics, has guidance on it. But it's up to journals like Nature, etc., to say, well, look, you shouldn't be doing marketing of a preprint. Now, what are the consequences? What is the sort of case law? Nobody knows. But it doesn't sit right, because how many times have you peer-reviewed a paper where you go, oh, there's something wrong in the methods, and the authors go, oh, yes, sorry, that was wrong, we'll update it. So in this case, if the claim is that it's 16% better, okay, what if that doesn't survive peer review? What if it doesn't hold up? What if it's 14%? What if it's 40%? What if it's -2? Right, like that's kind of the sorts of questions that it started kicking off.
So let's go into that then. So, having set the scene here that this is a preprint, and principally that is not okay to be producing this. It has been produced and it's been widely reported on. What have they reduced by 16% exactly? What are they claiming to have reduced by 16%?
It's a little hard to tell. And in part, it's a little hard to tell because in the ideal scenario, you publish quite a thorough protocol that says what you're going to do before you report the results. And protocols should follow guidelines. And the guidelines are there to ensure that we compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges. So, if you take Scribe software, which is very hot at the moment, there are guidelines out there about what is a good way of measuring quality, or how do we report that, so that what you avoid is company A reporting stats that make their tool look good, maybe it's very quick, company B making their tool look good, maybe it's very cheap, etc. Right? We need to compare like with like. So there are these guidelines that either take existing clinical trial guidelines or extend them for the special additional work that needs to go into place with AI to help other people understand what was done. And the work that OpenAI describes with Penda Health doesn't have that. So it just sort of shows up and says, this is what we did. And the challenge with that is that we don't know if the statistical analyses we're seeing were planned all along, or perhaps they ran it and they ran it again and they ran it again and they ran it again, and eventually it sort of looked like the story that you wanted to tell, and now you tell the story, right? So that's what those data say. Now, there's no bad intent in that. All researchers fall in love with those ideas. We hope the software does better. We always want it to do better, but we have to be open to the idea that it might not work out that way. And so that's why these are so important. And so I was surprised in both the Microsoft NEJM AI paper and the OpenAI Penda Health preprint that there either was no guideline adhered to, or in the case of the Penda paper, they said they adhered to quality improvement guidelines. But when I read the guidelines and I read the paper, they didn't match up. So, talk about that benefit of the doubt. If you sort of start off with one exclamation mark, the exclamation marks are sort of making a queue outside my head
God.
as I go end to end through this 160 odd page paper, and I ended up
Mm,
feeling not reassured.
mm. And so they talked about, so it's a 16% relative reduction in diagnostic errors and
Yes.
13% in treatment errors. It's, I don't know. Again, I work in media, right? And there's a load of stuff that you have to do in order to make something sound even vaguely interesting to news. You look at this and you go, well, 16% is not a huge number. So you go, okay, well, how do we make this newsworthy? We need to have some punchy words here, some punchy elements that make this, people turn around and look. So then you go diagnostic errors, and you're like, oof, okay, now it's starting to sound like something. Treatment errors, oof, now it's really okay. That's interesting, because actually 16% diagnostic errors does sound quite punchy,
Mm.
but it's very unclear what that actually means. And like any student listening, any third year medical student listening will know that if you want to critique a paper, go to the methods, and you go, well, as you've written, it rests entirely on the judgment of people reviewing EMR notes. And then there was another issue about AI marking its own homework as well. So
Yeah, so I'll try and explain it, although there are other people with far deeper AI expertise than me who have run these types of studies before. So I think what they've built is a system that embeds itself in the EHR. And to be clear, the health system is very innovative. They engage with lots of quality improvement work. They've done lots of work with electronic tools in the past. So it's not like this is a health community that's totally new to the use of technology. These people are operators. They understand
hmm,
how this stuff works. The idea is that the EHR system is upgraded with a sort of cognitive companion, if you like, the co-pilot, to flag things as either red, yellow, or green, based upon whether or not the documentation has been properly done and seems to be going in the direction of, good clinical management. The challenge is, how does one decide if a doctor seeing a patient has taken enough notes, if they have written down the right things, if they have asked the right questions, if they've proposed the right tests? Um, and the broader the diagnosis space, the harder that is to pin down. If I put 100 people in front of you with suspected appendicitis and showed them to 10 emergency room clinicians, I'd expect a very high level of agreement
hmm,
about the questions and the urgency and whatever.
yeah,
Okay, what if we throw in fibromyalgia and diabetes and a brain tumor and the common cold, and there's nothing wrong with you at all? And, and.
hmm,
As that information space broadens, and as we start adding other types of specialists, okay, psychiatrists, emergency room doctors, orthopedic surgeons, and some from England and some from America, etc. And this is what was done. There was an independent panel of about 120 physicians from around the world, only about a third of whom were from Africa, asked to weigh in and to rate a subset of these cases as saying would they agree. And so the challenge is when you say oh, there's been a 16% improvement, that's based on the independent raters saying this is better or this is worse. But one of the challenges I identified in the results was that the raters didn't agree with each other brilliantly well. There wasn't
hmm,
that strong of an agreement. And so that's what I think puts the 16% question in my mind, because anytime you hear a declarative statement like it's this much better, you kind of go, well, that's an estimate, isn't it? It's an estimate, and
hmm,
there's some range of error. And what you hope is that some correct statistical method has been followed to have some confidence that the true result lies within the range between, we're saying 16, but maybe is it between 10 and 20, or is it between -2 and plus? Like, these are the types of questions we need to ask. Um, the LLM side was sort of which was an interesting methodological application. But again, if we can't be sure of the foundation of what's going on, bringing in LLMs that, I mean, if I run the same query 10 times, I probably get 10 different answers,
hmm,
right? Like adding them as an additional marker. And in both the Microsoft paper and the OpenAI paper, there's a little hint of throwing shade at other models. Um,
hmm.
so, there was some stuff in the Microsoft AI paper where they tried to run any New England Journal of Medicine cases through other people's chatbots, and they sort of didn't perform as well. And you go, okay, well, so I have done those types of studies. And the challenge is you've got to be really careful. Like, what if the internet goes down? Do we reload it? What if it doesn't understand it? Do we help explain it? What if this one can take images and this one can't? So how
Mm.
much sort of spoon feeding you do for your model versus the competitor's model is extremely important. And as you start drilling into a lot of this, it's kind of unclear. Well, who did the physicians work for? Did they work for Microsoft and OpenAI? Were they paid? Did they know what the overall thesis was? Because all of these things, there's nothing, again, there's no bad intent here, but all these things kind of introduce the biases that we know plague all of research, right? The replicability crisis of many sciences is through well-intentioned people adding up all these little cumulative heuristic biases. And so the whole process of guidelines and science and peer review it's far from perfect, but it exists to try and
Yes.
iron those out.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Like I've noticed in the sort of B2C world, the consumer world, the greater amount of discourse there is around certain health stuff, the more likely it is for people to start now quoting papers. And people
Mm.
we seem to be in this era of, well, we don't want pseudoscience, we want evidence. But then, I mean, I don't even know the world of evidence to the level that you know evidence, but I know the world of evidence more than Joe Blogs on the street because I'm a scientist and I'm trained in it. But Joe Blogs on the street is also quite likely to go, well, I've read a paper and it said this and therefore that. And actually, we're in this world now where for a lot of people, evidence is binary. They read this and they go 16% relative reduction in diagnostic errors. ChatGPT is amazing. We should be doing this. We should be doing,
And that
and that's
isn't that just long
goodwill.
enough to remember? You can remember that soundbite.
You
So when you're down
can,
the pub or on Twitter, you can remember that soundbite.
yeah.
And that's pretty key here because actually in the blog post, one of the things that they wrote, and I'm not sort of blaming the scientists here. I worked
Mm.
in these types of companies. I imagine the people that write the blog posts are not the scientists,
Yeah.
but they compare the magnitude of this benefit to the magnitude of some other things that have come through in medicine that also had a 16% same. But they talk about that as an effect size, and that's not really how effect sizes work. So their quote was, "These effect sizes of the 16%, improvement in diagnostic uh, accuracy are comparable to antibiotic stewardship programs
Whoa.
or alerts to encourage statin prescriptions in patients who need it." But this finding comes from a single system that can support a wide array of clinical decisions. And then they go forward and say, in absolute terms, the introduction of AI consult would avert diagnostic errors in 22,000 visits and treatment errors in 29,000 visits annually at Penda alone. So all the time here, so you've mentioned methods a couple of times. So there's the methods, there's the study that we've built, and there's the claims that rest upon this.
Mm.
And in the discussion, we sort of say more research is needed, right? What we need is a bunch of evidence, usually meta-analyses and systematic reviews. Ideally, these are the things that sit at the top of the pyramid of evidence. Ideally, done by an objective, neutral, independent group who does not have stock options in the company, to make these claims. But I do think it is puzzling why something like this could get through, because it very clearly is not the case that this software simulation of green, yellow, red traffic light is that going to have as big a magnitude in global health as statins and antibiotics? Really? Does this paper prove that point? Because if that paper doesn't prove this point, and this is just the first of many, what the community needs to be more vigilant of is, are all future claims now going to need to get a lot more rigor, a lot more review before they're taken at
Yeah.
face value? If we are indeed the intended customers of this
Yes.
information, are people with MDs and PhDs, are we meant to be critiquing this, or are we such a small constituent part of the readership that maybe my deeply nerdy sleuthing is not important, because we're seeing big announcements from the US AI strategy, right? We're seeing big
Mm.
partnerships with the UK government about OpenAI and others having key roles, and I'm very far from a conspiracy theorist, but if I was a civil servant without scientific training, if I was a politician without scientific training, and I heard, oh, they're doing stuff in health, they're doing stuff in Kenya, that sounds good.
Mm.
Maybe I would be swayed by that. And so maybe we're not the intended audience here, and that's why it's fine on some level that these rules and these norms have been violated, because this was never for us.
Yeah, and what comes to mind as well, again, forcing myself here, like to play devil's advocate a little bit, is to go, is this a case of perfection is the enemy of progress, and this is progress, and actually we should get out the way of this because this is the future and it is going to be, but then, I'm clinically trained, so then I go at like patient safety above everything else. And I think if we start playing this out to, well, what like you said at the start, what is the potential damage here? Is that everyone is in the pub quoting each other, going 16% relative reduction in diagnostic errors. This should be doing our diagnosis. And even I'm cringing saying the words because I feel like I need a class 3 medical device certification on myself at this point to start saying this out loud. But
yeah, but if you look at things like the NHS 10-year plan, it's saying these types of tools should be.
It is, you're right.
NHS. So is this preprint going to be used as evidence to show to somebody to go, hey, look, we should do this? And then are the voices within the system, do they have the time to even check this, right? So yeah. So by the way, I love gadgets. There's a AI-powered robot vacuum cleaner running around my kitchen right now. So love gadgets, lifelong passion. But the perfect to the enemy of the good. The thing that probably triggered writing a second article when it risked being almost the same as the first article was that there is another study happening in parallel to the one that OpenAI talked about. So I'll back it up a second for anyone that's not deeply nerdy on evidence. There's all different types of studies one can do, right? So the lowest level of evidence is I'm Paul and I think this is great. That's expert opinion or face validity. It's basically meaningless, particularly if it's from me. Then you have case studies, right? I saw this one patient and they ate a carrot and their leg fall off. Carrot must cause leg fall off. Case series, a few more of those. You start going to objective studies. Oh, I measured, executives, and they're all very tall. Therefore, there's something about being tall that makes you good about being executives, right? So just a cross section in time, very prone to bias. Somewhere in the middle, you get to a randomized control trial where we split people out and there should be blinding, so we don't know what groups people are in. And those could be small when it's a formative piece of research, or it could be very large when it's a big study with lots of variables that we want to test. And then ideally, we have lots of RCTs, and then someone comes and reviews all the RCTs, adds them together, assesses them for bias, and then we have this pyramid of evidence with systematic reviews at the top and low-level stuff at the bottom. Siri's just started spying on me, so I'm worried now that Apple's.
Yeah, that was Siri talking to Paul for those that didn't hear that in the background.
So the OpenAI study is a retrospective observational study, and it's called a quality improvement study, which is a little odd for a couple of reasons. One is that quality improvement studies often don't need ethics approval in many health systems. I don't know if that's true in this exact case, but usually what you do in a quality improvement survey is you go, we're going to keep business as usual, but we're going to make this change to the intake software or the flow of patients who get to see physiotherapy consults, and we'll see what happens, right? So and the aim is to get better into review. You're not trying to prove a point in quality improvement studies. And you're generally not trying to say this is better than that, because that's not the type of study it's equipped for. At the same time as this study has been going on, literally week by week, there is a randomized control trial funded by the Gates Foundation through an organization called PATH, which has got a huge body of evidence and experience of working in lower middle income countries with technology deployments and all the rest of it, at the same clinics. That study described its protocol in Nature Digital Medicine late last year and published a full, very detailed protocol with all the guidelines followed, with all the proper literature review, with all the statistical things. And it was a lot more specific. I think it's only looking at diabetes and hypertension. So you know what I said earlier about that broad decision space and using the example of appendicitis? Well, now imagine that this same software, and it's the same software being tested in the RCT, was only looking at the accuracy of diabetes and hypertension. Now, the good thing about diabetes and hypertension is we have tests for them that we have very high confidence about.
Yeah.
Whereas the problem with fibromyalgia or clown phobia is we don't have tests for them. And so if someone agrees or disagrees in a diagnosis, it's all a bit fuzzy. Diabetes, hypertension, we know if we're right or not right. So really well-designed, elegant RCT that's not mentioned at all in OpenAI's preprint, even though it shares at least one author in common. Not mentioned at all on the blog. At the very least, normally when you do this type of paper, you say, future studies will explore blah, blah, blah. It was conspicuous by its absence. And the first thing that tipped me off was in the preprint, when you list the authors, you say, Bob works for Microsoft and Jeff works for the hospital and Susan works for a software company, right? It didn't have that. And that's important because I noticed that it didn't declare where the funding came from or where other sources of funding might have come from for the authors. And so when I saw this sort of Gates-funded RCT, I expected to read, oh, we also have this nice grant from the Gates Foundation, thanks very much. It seemed conspicuous by its absence.
I see. So just making this absolutely clear then, the issue is that Bill Gates could just be puppeteering this whole thing. It's basically what you're saying. let's clip that as a soundbite.
the master stroke of the 5G chips in the vaccines, and so basically what I've concluded is this is all a massive play to get me to finally update to Windows 11. But Windows 11 does not play Roller Tycoon 3, and so I'm out. For that reason, I'm out. Yeah. So I have no personal thesis about why that is missing. I'm just saying that I know if I did a formative piece of research, and I've published lots of formative pieces of research to show, it starts off as a C-, and then it's a C+, and then it's a B, and then it's a B+. And then so when you say I've got an A grade product, people believe you because they see you're working.
I see.
It is very odd that someone would publish a type of study that's lower on the pyramid of evidence, that makes broad claims, that don't seem to be supported by the evidence there, that in a preprint that doesn't conform to the usual structure of a medical paper, when there's a really elegantly designed study that, according to the original plan, should be reporting out in Q3, Q4. So it's only speculation on my part here. I have no inside information, but it feels like something to do with timing has driven why July 2025. And that's the part about which, yes, I like I said, I have no interest in conspiracy theories. But again, if, like with the Microsoft thing, it's a pattern, if it becomes a pattern that when we need to tell a compelling story or something, some bad PR has come out, we've just laid off 10,000 people, but here's a nice story about how in the future we'll be great at health, that would be a problem. Or if we're trying to justify a very large investment that has been made from one company into another company, and investors and others are saying, what did we invest all this money for? It would seem like a good time to go, look, great, we can help all of human health, which again, good aspirations, wonderful aspirations, that's what we all want. But if that becomes the driver of when things come out, we'd be in trouble. And I can tell you with absolute certainty, if you were a pharmaceutical company and you did that, you would be in heaps of trouble from large regulators with significant powers to compel you not to do that again. So there's a reason why when a drug company announces the results of its clinical trial at a meeting, that has gone through a very thorough process of vetting and review, probably hundreds of people at the company, including many medics and scientists and regulators and all the rest of it, to ensure that the claim being made about weight loss and GLP-1s, what have you, is robust. Because otherwise, if biotech and pharma was a Wild West, we'd be in real trouble.
100%. And I've heard for so long now that algorithms need to be treated like drugs. And it's so true. Like, as soon as they're reframed in that way, it's so easy to just be like, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? Like, that's actually quite frightening. Like, why aren't we treating algorithms like drugs? Like, this is bizarre.
Well,
like, why?
They can definitely have guardrails. I mean, go into ChatGPT and ask it to make you a story about Star Wars using the IP, and it'll say, oh no, sorry, I can't do that.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I've got this wart on my finger. Is it cancer? Should I go to the doctor right now? Oh, let me have a look. Now, I'm a neuropsychologist. if I looked at the wart on your finger and tried to pretend I was a doctor, I think that might be a crime.
Mm.
So, you know, I feel like it's something we could at least look at and say, all right, well, if it's going to go into doctor mode, what else is happening differently in doctor mode? Sam Altman's really recently said, as a reminder to people who perhaps weren't already aware of it, that your conversations with ChatGPT are not privileged.
Yeah.
If you ask for legal advice from your lawyer, that's privileged. If we have a conversation about the aforementioned wart on my finger, we have doctor-patient privilege. But if the thing is acting like a therapist, a doctor, a lawyer, and all that information could be subpoenaed, for example, then that leads us into some riskier territory for patients, right? So at a minimum, I mean, getting a little bit off track, but I once looked after a database of 8,000 people with HIV, some of whom were in countries where, it was illegal to be gay. And so the potential could be that this type of data, if leaked or subpoenaed or what have you, could end up, in terrible consequences for people in authoritarian regimes and others. And, there's a reason Médecins Sans Frontières does a lot of their work on paper.
Indeed.
Because when you create scalable systems,
Indeed.
you're also creating some significant vulnerability. So anyway, that would be down the more doomy end of the scale.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that's great is these things are all addressable. Microsoft and OpenAI have the smartest people on the planet fighting each other tooth and nail to go and work for them. They have $50 million programs of research with Stanford and Harvard and all the big places. They have access to the brightest minds of a generation. So this is all eminently addressable. I just think we need to kind of maybe draw their attention to a bit of focus and kind of go, okay, you can't move fast and break things in every domain.
Indeed.
And, I do believe there's a community out there willing to work with them and collaborate and support and lay out why the guidelines are there and be quick and, move fast. And if so, then we'll make the trust. But, you only need to go far as back as IBM Watson Health to look at cases where steamrollering with big press releases that don't hold water will only last you a year or two. And then you're a bust. And reputation has popped and you can't get it back again.
Linked to harm, you mentioned harm and geography there in the case of HIV, and a lot of programs, Médecins Sans Frontières, etc., operating in low middle income countries. Do you read anything into this being done in the global south?
So I really only have the evidence from the manuscript to go from and the RCT that's happening in parallel. And what I see from that is that this group approached OpenAI and there's a doctor there who's very into technology and said, we would like to try this. So yeah, I mean, that's the only information we have. Certainly, I think we do have obligations in all sorts of ways. We're based in the UK. We're a country with a long history of being colonizers, and we should be aware and conscious of the influence we've had on other health systems, other education systems, and many of those issues continue to affect communities well into the present and beyond. But yes, I suppose one would have questions about the level of ethical oversight that is available in different countries, or perhaps the enthusiasm that might go unchecked in a lower resource setting of the potential for unequal potential benefits of working with a large organization like this. If you're a very prestigious institution in America or the UK, it's pretty commonplace for you to work with big tech, right? You have very good partnerships. Perhaps if you're an LMIC, maybe that balance of power is a little bit different, right? And so you might think we should be extra super duper attentive to that. Right, because I think, particularly with the risk that so much of AI is trained on white middle class Anglo-American folk who look like me, that might be a place where, in particular, issues like algorithmic drift could be of greater risk to populations who don't look like me. And so, at the moment, we're talking about relatively simple things about, did you write this note properly? But if in the not too distant future, it starts to look at things like genetics. So in the NHS 10-year plan, we're supposed to be whole genome sequencing lots of people. I know for a fact there are not enough genetic counsellors. If someone was trying to return genetic information back to people, that's kind of a risk there. We also know that different groups are affected differently by different conditions, different medications, and we just probably need to show our working to kind of go,
Yeah.
how have we taken this into account? So one sort of anecdata that I put in there is about Kenya in particular. I happen to know this because I did a piece of writing about some research that took place in South Africa, looking at the epidemiology of different countries in Africa, and was interested that there'd never been a confirmed case of Ebola in Kenya. So when the preprint was saying we took into account the epidemiology and the clinical guidelines of Kenya, I just sort of posed this example. So what does that mean? Does that mean that the algorithm would know that there's never been a case of Ebola and so discount that?
Hmm.
Which might be okay, because otherwise everybody who shows up with a nosebleed, you're going to potentially call the quarantine team.
Hmm.
But what happens if someone does? What happens if you get the first case? What if someone comes in from a neighboring country and is infected? If the algorithms play to downweight it because of the epidemiology, great. How do you then adjust to situations on the ground? Say if a mysterious new illness appeared from Wuhan, China. So
Hmm.
we've just been through this, everybody. It seems
Hmm.
like we do have the time, we do have the resources, we do have the experience to incorporate some of this knowledge into the systems that we use, but we have to progress systematically. Incremental advances, radical incrementalism, I think will win the day here and build systems that we all trust.
With radical transparency.
Absolutely.
I mean, plus or minus radicals, to be perfectly honest, just transparency. I think that that seems to be the theme running through this for me, and for whatever reason, this keeps coming up with AI and LLMs, particularly trust and transparency. It keeps being an issue. Product wise, it's obviously the lack of determinism, the black bottle, like all of that stuff can lead to this lack of trust, and it's not a transparent system. I can't see the innards, and therefore that's perhaps where we start. But if then you layer in the lack of transparency associated with essentially press releasing a preprint as if it were perfect evidence, if people like yourself are going to call this out, we are going to appropriately start to lose trust in it, because the question for anyone sensible or scientifically minded will then go, well, why couldn't you wait? Why couldn't have Microsoft waited last time? Why couldn't have OpenAI waited this time? And that's a genuine question. I don't sit here wanting to cast judgment on either organisation for fear of disappearing.
I would love these things to work. I would love these things to
This
be
is
great.
it.
I would love to put in weird symptoms at 2 a.m. into a system that is not making assumptions or is judging or is sleep deprived or on his third shift or whatever.
Yeah,
Like I want these systems to work, but I'm going to put my health and the health of my family into them.
that's it.
So I have questions, and trust me, bro. I mean,
Isn't cutting
I,
it.
I've seen it not work enough times, that I shall not trust but verify is the process, right?
Mm,
There's a reason all the B-2 stealth bombers are not in hangars. It's so that the Russian satellites can see them, so that they know how many nukes the Americans have that are airborne, and vice versa. That's why the Ukrainian drones could blow up all those Tu-95s, because trust but verify means show you're working. If we're doing that for the
mm,
existential nuclear threat of mutually assured destruction,
mm,
if AI is that great and that powerful and will become that ubiquitous, I think we need to treat it in the same way. Um,
mm,
show me your algorithms.
mm. For founders listening who might be, I don't know, about to pilot an AI tool in healthcare, what would be your single best piece of advice on evidence generation? You mentioned from trust me, bro, right up to meta-analysis. I mean, this question actually has been going on for ever since I've been in health tech. People have been trying to figure this out, how much evidence is appropriate. But an AI tool in healthcare specifically, what advice are you giving to them? I
So,
think you
so
are
in the
actually speaking to them.
UK, yeah, so in the UK, there's a group called Circe AI with a ton of expertise from the clinical, the scientific, the regulatory side that exists to facilitate this type of work. And then there will be other local groups in the US and other places. So I think it's a real high priority to work with those groups. For the evidence, so this is a personal little windmill of mine. I think there's kind of a bit of an N-shaped curve, right? Like a dose benefit curve. You need to have some evidence. You cannot spend your entire, $5 million seed round doing nothing but producing papers. That would be bad. That would mean you're a computer science lab, right? So there's some sort of relationship between how big a claim you're making, what's the scale of what you're
Interesting.
trying to do, and what can you do. The good news is, I think you can start out small. Publish your user experience research. Publish your formative, hey, we tried this and it didn't work. Start with posters.
Mm.
Go to conferences, engage with the community, and you can kind of build it up from there, really. So yeah, I don't think it has to be one perfect RCT in the Lancet proves everything.
Mm.
You build up a portfolio. So the Digital Medicine Society is got some really excellent work in this area. I worked on something called the evidence defined criteria with a US payer, Jordan Silverman, and he kind of mapped out, here are the things that increase our interest, our credibility of the evidence. Here are the things that decrease it. And it was specifically designed for digital health to take away some of the flags of, oh, well, Professor X from University Y endorsed it. That actually marks you down on the evidence defined criteria. So yeah, and then I think you can work with a scientific advisory board and really sit with them and go, well, what evidence would persuade you, you know,
Mm.
to deploy this? If the main proponent was your academic enemy,
Mm.
what would be
Mm.
such persuasive evidence that you
Mm.
would go, okay, well, I'll give this a shot, right? Because in at least hospital medicine, things like WhatsApp, things like Scribes, tore through the system with no need for RFPs because they just worked. You could see them just work. Um, that's not going to be the case for this. This is going to be large, complex, and iterative. And it is a little bit different for areas like radiology, dermatology, mental health. We see a lot of these things. So they each have slightly different aspects to it. And I think particularly where they're medical devices, it has to be in lockstep with the regulatory pace, right? So yeah, I think sometimes maybe that's what puts you in lockstep of, I have to prove something to a regulator, I might as well prove it to the market. And it can also be a good spur to build your IP strategy that way as well. Once you've declared something as the state of the art, it can affect your timeline for filing patents,
Mm.
um, and things like this. So, yeah, it's an investment. We talk about your proof stack. You have a tech stack, you need a proof stack, and
Interesting.
you can't run. Most startups are probably working on about 40 pieces of software to run their business. I think it's the same with evidence, right? There's some expert opinion, there's some advisory boards, there's some trials, there's some studies, there's some
Nice. Yeah.
surveys, there's some health economics, and it builds. And really, your sort of credibility is the sum of your proof stack, much like your technical excellence is the sum of your tech stack.
I love that. Thank you, Paul. It's a really nice framework. That I definitely, yeah, I'm definitely going to commit that to memory and start repeating that. And I will quote you. I'm left uneasy about this, if I'm honest. It's. I'd love to actually get someone from Microsoft on to talk about this. I'd love to get someone from OpenAI on, actually, to talk about this. So if anyone is listening that knows anybody in either of these teams that wants to ping this to them and ask them to come on for me or do an intro, then please feel free. But I am left uneasy, and I think it's because, like, you, when you're writing this, you sort of know, don't you? You'd expect whoever's written this and someone in the chain of the teams that have gone from writing it to press releasing it and publishing it, someone or a few people would know that, hey, we at least should put, by the way, this is just a preprint right at the top and make this clear. And that hasn't been done. And I'm really intrigued as to why. I'm really intrigued as to why that level of just simple, I don't know what you'd call it, academic decorum, or like following clear principle or following guidelines set by people that make the rules. Like, why hasn't that been done? That's the question that I have here. And I think that that's
Yeah.
rooted in a desire for, above all else, patient safety. And neither you nor I, Paul, want to be in the way of progress. That's not why we do what we do. But you and I, as clinicians, will just be so trained and conditioned to know that that is only ever appropriate when patient safety is put first, and to laud claims in front of people that may or may not be statistically significant should feel abhorrent. Like it should for anyone that has that level of integrity required to publish this should not feel like that is okay. And that's what I'm really intrigued to get to the bottom of here. So again, just going to say it, would love someone from either of those organizations to come on and talk about this. But that's kind of where I sit. What would you want to leave people with, Paul, that are listening to this conversation, be it from those organizations or be it from the health tech industry more broadly? My one, by the way, is a preprint is not a paper. That's what I would love everyone to take from this.
Yeah, so I think, look, I predict that there were voices within each of the company that said this, and sometimes
Okay.
it speaks to whether or not scientific and medical voices are to be consulted, or if they
That's
actually have
interesting.
authority within a
Yeah,
company, right? And I think if you have a chief medical officer, if you have a chief scientific officer, if they pull the red cord and it doesn't do anything, then
interesting.
you have a problem there. So I think that that's the case. I do think that we need to ask ourselves, when a big tech company who, through pension funds and shareholdings, like on some level we own and we buy their
Mm,
products and we're their consumers, who controls who here? Do we need to be grateful that these organizations have deigned to drop a crumb of their evidence, or actually are we the people who control these systems?
yeah.
Is there a risk that these things are in some ways anti-democratic, and that actually there's a more strident view that we need to take? And again, I think there's plenty of opportunity to reset that dialogue and understand, where is a benign influence and well practiced and what have you, and where are people chasing hype cycles? And I think the degree to which we understand that and that we believe in that as a community will only accelerate the growth of these companies and speeding up of all the things we want to do: faster diagnosis, faster treatment, a more personalized care. But yeah, the thing I'd leave with is my favorite Carl Sagan quote: "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence."